Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video we're going to be discussing Prime Minister's questions, as I often do. It's very different this week. Very different. Now, really quickly, what I want to go through in this, I'd normally be saying I'm going to go through the 6 questions that Keir Starmer, as leader of the opposition, asked, plus 2 questions that Ian Blackford, as leader of the SNP, the second largest opposition party, asked as well. On this particular occasion, Keir Starmer wasn't available, as he wasn't early this week, waiting on COVID results for a member of his family, so he's isolating. And so Deputy Leader Angela Rayner stepped up. And the other thing is, I'm not going to talk about Ian Blackford's because I might want to do that in a separate video in a couple of days, because he asked one very good question, one very bad question. And actually, in the bad question, Boris Johnson seemed to suggest that he was a threat to the United Kingdom, which was a remarkably frank admission. But I want to pick that one up separately. It will just seem disjointed after I discuss the exchange with Rayner, because it was like nothing I've seen. And but before we got on to those questions, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So it was it was a weird PMQs. I wasn't able to watch it live. I'm not able to watch it live anymore because I do some teaching on a Wednesday morning, which means I have to watch it later on, which is, you know, I usually have to play it back a couple of times anyway to get everything down that I want. But I was pausing it so often and wandering off and going, what? It was weird. And it was, before Rayner even stood up, it was weird. Because what always happens, for those who don't know, the first MP that gets to ask a question of the Prime Minister is not actually the leader of the opposition. It's someone else. It could be an opposition MP. It's more usually someone from the government's own benches. And they actually ask 2 questions, because the first question, they always just stand up and say question number 1, because question number 1 is that it's just the convention now. You ask what the Prime Minister's been up to that day, and the Prime Minister stands up, you know, and I can't remember the exact word, and it is exact word, and I should know it by now, but they basically allude to the fact that they've had meetings with ministers and they will have further such meetings later on, that sort of thing. It's all rubbish, but they asked the question anyway. But on this particular occasion, Boris Johnson added something else to it. He marks the 400th anniversary of the voyage of the Mayflower and tried to big up the links between the UK and the USA, which I thought to myself, is there a reason he's doing this? Because this is most unusual. Because usually if you want to do something like that, you get one of your backbenchers to throw you a question. Because quite a lot of the questions that will come from his backbenchers, some of them are genuine, but some of them have just been, you know, like planted there by him or his strategists. And you would, so he put it in this question, and I thought it's interesting timing, because, and I'll be doing a video on this in a bit, a number of influential US politicians have written to Boris Johnson basically to say, what the bloody hell are you playing at? And if you're going to carry on behaving like this, you can kiss the idea of a US trade deal goodbye. Ain't happening, son. Is that the reason why, in this very disjointed way, he tried to big up links between the UK and the US? Really odd. But anyway, Rayner's first question. It's quite a good one. Because what I was wanting to see from Angela Rayner was, she's not been experienced in frontline politics before now. Obviously, she's no stranger to political discourse, because at the end of the day, she's the deputy leader of a major party. She was voted into that position by the party membership. So she's made a name for herself before this position, but not leading debates in Parliament. So I don't know what she'd be like in it. I kind of figured, in fact, I said on Twitter beforehand, that actually she's going to get her first experience. This is a bloody good time to do it, because at the end of the day, it's Boris Johnson. But the way Boris Johnson reacted to her, very strange. Because when you look at the way Boris Johnson behaves with Keir Starmer, the way he behaved with Ed Miliband earlier this week, the way he behaved with Jeremy Corbyn before as well, there was a certain theme to it. You know, doesn't answer the questions, very aggressive, goes off on a tangent. There wasn't any of that with Angela Rayner, which I took to be that he's treating her with contempt, which I thought was foolish. But anyway, Rayner's first question. Now, often what happens in these situations, you'll sometimes, to emphasise a point, Keir Starmer's been very effective at this. And by the way, when it comes to the questions, Keir Starmer, when he's asking his 6 questions, remember, they're not strictly speaking just his 6 questions. He will discuss them with others. I believe he discusses them with Angela Rayner because they do work very closely together. The same thing will have happened here. It's not really sort of whose questions they are, it's how you ask them and also how you seize upon answers. And usually what Starmer's done very well, Corbyn used to do this a bit as well, is rather than say what he believes, he will quote usually, members of the government or members of the public. So that will sometimes mean reading out letters from constituents. So Angela Rayner stood up and says, I've got a letter here from a man named Keir. He wasn't able to go to work this week and his children can't go to school because they're having to wait for a coronavirus test result. And he said, got a good laugh, this one. And she said, despite the Prime Minister's promise of results within 24 hours, that poor old Keir was doing the right thing. He was self-isolating as he's able to do. But she said, but some can't do this, like care workers that she used to work alongside. And she asked the Prime Minister, because she's getting on to the point that if you have to self-isolate, for many workers, that means statutory sick pay. Statutory sick pay is not enough to live on, quite frankly. And she asked the Prime Minister, how much does a care worker earn? What is the average hourly rate? To which Johnson then stood up and he first of all couldn't work out what to call her. And I'm thinking, because you don't just call them by the name or anything like that, you can call them by their position. In her case, the Right Honourable Lady. He eventually got there, but it took him some time. Or you can call them the Right Honourable Member for the constituency they're from. That's much harder to remember. He ummed and erred his way through it. And I'm thinking, how long? He's been in Parliament for a good long time. He knows how to address people. And this is going to be important later. Is it because she's a woman who doesn't know how to address women in Parliament? Is that it? Because there's another point I need to make in a bit. But anyway, he eventually got it out, congratulated her on basically standing in front of him. Apparently this is to be congratulated for. Tried to get in on the joke. He said that, he was made aware that Starmer had a negative result and so doesn't know why he's here. To which I immediately thought, now I don't know what the test status is with Keir Starmer here. All I can say is that Keir Starmer was not getting a test. So how would Boris Johnson know that Starmer has tested negative when actually Starmer hasn't taken a COVID test? As far as I'm aware, it's a member of his family that needed the test. He's self-isolating because they're showing symptoms. If they test positive, then he'll have to carry on isolating for a bit and then have a test. But he's not getting a test. So straight away he got that wrong. But then he said, well, we're working very hard. We're working to turn tests around very quickly. And he says, and people are looking at the record of this country and it compares extremely well with any other European country. And on the issue of care homes, he says, we'll do everything we can to protect care homes and care workers. And this government is paying these workers substantially more as a result of our policies. So obviously not answering the question. To which Rayner stood up and immediately said, which you need to do every time, point out the answer. It says the whole country will have seen that the Prime Minister, who she mentioned had once earned an hourly rate of £2,300, so the whole country will have seen that the Prime Minister doesn't know how much a care worker earns, because that was the question. And she said that the average wage is barely more than £8 an hour, and half of them earn less than the real living wage, because the government used the term living wage. We used to have this thing called minimum wage, was replaced with the term living wage, to make it sound like we were paying people what they needed to live. Obviously it's not. There is a real living wage. And she quoted the Prime Minister on his plan for care homes. But she says, he was going to have this plan for care homes. She says, well, where is it? We don't seem to have this plan for care homes. And this was some time ago. And then she said for a question, will the Prime Minister commit to giving the care sector the funding it needs urgently ahead of winter? Because the first tranche of money that they gave, which was piss poor, it's coming to an end this month. They need to get ready for winter now. This is going to be a hell of a time, second wave and all that. Are you going to make sure that they get the funding they need? To which, again, I know at this point I noticed, because this is now Boris Johnson giving his second answer to her. And he didn't go on the attack. Now, with his first question, when he gave his first answer, he actually said that the question that Rayner was asking, this is important for later as well, was the right question. It was an important question. He said the same thing again. Well, it's an important question. It's an important point. And, members of the public will, of course, be interested in this. And he wasn't attacking her. I thought that was interesting. At this point, I was really confused. This is when I had to go for my first walk around. And I was thinking, is this because she was a care worker before she became an MP? What was something else? Is it something else? Anyway, he said that tomorrow there will be a further action plan announced. You notice how it's always in the future. But okay, we'll see. Hopefully that means there is going to be a plan. And he said that he wanted to see a toughening up of the rules in moving people from one care home to another. And he's going to make sure that they get the PPE and the cash they need for other things as well. To which Rayner, do you know what I mean? I'm thinking, if you were watching this today, or yesterday rather, and you'd never seen PMQs before, you've never seen the British Parliament in work, you would think, oh, this is all very civilised. Yeah, we're told the British are civilised lot, despite how they've been acting the last few years. Oh yeah, this is good. Very respectful. You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. But anyway, Rayner stood up. She said she welcomed the news from the Prime Minister, but you know what? You need to get your skates on, lad, because they're still not getting what they need. They're not getting the PPE. They're not getting the other things. The Prime Minister needs to make this a priority. You need to deal with this urgently, because this is a problem right now. And then she said the Prime Minister has put his faith in Operation Moonshot. But on planet Earth, there were still no tests available in many high infection areas, including her own constituencies. And she noted that in July, the Prime Minister promised the testing of healthcare workers on a weekly basis by September. And then she asked, yes or no, Prime Minister, do all care homes in this country have weekly tests for their staff? Yes or no question. Now, again, I want to draw a comparison. Whenever Keir Starmer asks a simple yes or no question, not only does he not get a yes or no, he doesn't get the question even touched on. It's not even like a tangential answer. Goes completely off kilter. Refuses to be drawn into doing something as silly as answering a question. This one, he said yes. He was asked, are all care homes getting weekly tests for their staff? All. Not most. All. And he said yes. There were gasps, audible gasps. Now, I'm not there. I can't tell whether they were coming from the opposition benches or the government benches or both. But gasps. He said, yes, to the best of my knowledge. Now, because the answer's not true. She wouldn't have asked it. I know anyway from reports that it's not true. Even if you didn't, you'd know the fact that she was asking it means you don't ask a yes or no question of the Prime Minister if you're an opponent unless the yes or no answer will either be a lie or a very bad answer. If it's the truth, it's a bad answer. And it is widely reported. As I say, it's not just that there's little gaps here or there. It's not like he's saying, oh yeah, they are, and there's one care home in the country that's not. Which no one would make a fuss about, although it should still be doing it. Huge gaps. But again, he said, and she's right to express the frustration that people around the country will be feeling regarding the massive demand for tests. Now, again, note what he's saying here. First of all, he's not shouting. He's sounded quite reasonable. But the emphasis on demand, not lack of supply. He's saying that the people are frustrated with the demand for tests. No, they're not. They're frustrated because when they need a test, they can't get one. But again, he's trying to use the language of excessive demand, not enough supply. Because not enough supply, that's his fault. Too much demand, well, he can blame others for that. And he's making it sound like it's something that even a competent government would fall foul of. And he also talked about people wanting tests, not needing, wanting tests, as if people are just waking up one morning, what am I going to do today? I know, I'll go out for a COVID test. I fancy a COVID test on a particular reason. And again, it's preying on the ignorance that many people may have, because the majority of us haven't needed a test. We may, unless we've asked people who've had a test, we may not know the procedure. We may not know, for example, that people ask you questions before you're allowed a test. You're not allowed to just wander up to a testing centre and ask for a test. You're checked out. Have you got symptoms? They check your symptoms first. And if they're not satisfied that your symptoms would be suggestive of COVID, you don't get a test. But again, many people may not realise that. So he's making out that, it's too much demand. And, he says we're trying to meet that demand at record speed. Now, for me, and this isn't a criticism because it wasn't asked, at that point I thought to myself, do you know what I'm going to ask if I was in that position, I was to get up? I will therefore change the questioning from tests being done to tests not being done. I would ask the Prime Minister, okay, you're talking about demand all the time. What is the demand? Tell me how many tests per day are being requested in England. Because you're talking about demand all the time, so tell me what that demand is. Let me know you've actually read a thing. And, then he talked about increased capacity in the past few weeks, building new labs. We want to get up to 500,000 tests per day by the end of October. And he said, we are testing more than any other European country, something he'd said last week. So then Rayner came back and she quoted the chief executive of Health England from yesterday saying, we were promised weekly testing for staff. That is not being delivered. And again, she's not saying herself. Again, something Starmer does a lot. She's quoting someone who would know. This isn't party political. The fact of the matter is care home staff are not being tested. They're not being tested on a weekly basis. The Prime Minister has just told the House that they were. So he's lied. And it's all right adding that to the best of my knowledge. He's the Prime Minister. He should know this. And if he doesn't know it, he shouldn't answer yes. He should have just stood up and said, I'm afraid I don't know. And that doesn't look good. That's not a good look in the middle of a crisis like this. But at the same time, it would at least be truthful. What a time for Boris Johnson for the first time to answer a question directly. And he answers one where it's going to be a lie that's going to be instantly exposed. And he knows it will be instantly exposed. Of all the times. And I'm wondering at this point, this is the point where I thought to myself, right, he's just treating her with contempt. Because when he tries to attack Starmer, or when he tried to attack Miliband earlier this week, or on occasions when he's tried to attack Jeremy Corbyn, it's because in a way, he's treating them with respect. And I know being rude is not very respectful, but, politically speaking, because it's effort. He has to put effort into attacking them. He has to G himself up and get all angry and turn into the incredible sulk. And he wasn't doing that with her. And do you know what it was like? It was like he can't be asked. He's thinking to himself, no one cares about what you're saying. No one's going to watch this later. You're not the leader. Maybe it's even, and my girlfriend suggested this, maybe it's just because she's a woman. Maybe he's just thinking, no one cares what you look like. You have to say, little missy. Why aren't you in the kitchen, by the way? Because it really was contempt. The fact that he cannot be asked to he was even saying, oh yeah, good question, like patronising. Because if it's a good question, why isn't he giving the answers then? He's still not giving the answers, apart from that one time he did and he lied. And I can just think this is just pure contempt he's holding for her. But anyway, then Rayner said time and again he makes promises and then he breaks those promises. She said in June he said that we can now undertake to get all tests turned around in 24 hours by the end of June. Then she said, look, they've had 6 months to sort this out. The Prime Minister has had 6 months and he still can't deliver on his promises. The Health Secretary yesterday said it will take weeks to sort this out, but we don't have weeks. And at this point, normally, when it cuts across to Boris Johnson, when it's Starmer opposite, when it's Ed Miliband opposite, he's like shaking his head or he's gawping. No, he was nodding along as if he's listening. Yeah, good point. Oh. Anyway, she said, as I've said before, and I cannot get my head around this. Normally, behaviour like that would be a sign of respect, but it's not respect. This is Johnson treating her with utter irrelevance. Anyway, Rayner then quoted some government figures. Always worth throwing some of these in. She quoted government figures saying that there are 62,000 people a day being tested, not 500,000. She said the Prime Minister said that the capacity is 300,000 a day. But government's own figures are saying that the average is 62,000 a day being tested. She could have made mention of the fact that back in April they were claiming we were testing 100,000 people a day. We have never tested 100,000 people in a day. Even now, months later, the average is 62,000. She said, how does the Prime Minister explain this? At which point he said, look, we have delivered on the most thoroughgoing testing regime anywhere in Europe. And now, at this, again, questions I would have asked when I got up again. I would have asked then, okay, if he's saying, again, that we're doing more tests than any other country in Europe, I would, again, turn it on to not test done, test not done. I would say, how come people in other European countries are not being turned away for tests on this sort of scale? How come people tested in other countries are getting their results back in 24 hours? All of them. Not most of them, not some of them, all of them. Getting their tests back in 24 hours flat. How come those other countries are doing that and we're not? How are you saying that we're the best in Europe when actually we're turning away people for tests we can't give everyone tests that needs them, and when we do test them we cannot get all of them their test results back in 24 hours, but they can in other European countries. Anyway, the Prime Minister then said the tests conducted per day has gone up to 240,000 per day this week. Again, so now, very interesting thing to say, because again, would he have dared say that in PMQs against Starmer? Because he knows that the government figures show that to be a lie, and also he knows that she knows that because she has just quoted him the government figures, the latest government figures. He has just made up a figure, not out of his head, he'll have got someone to fiddle it, but he knows that he's contradicting what she has just said, and she has just quoted government figures. And he's never dared do that against Starmer. So why is he doing it against her? And then, now this was the thing where if a ball was dropped, this was it. Not from Boris Johnson, I have to say. Boris Johnson then quoted some per capita testing figures. He quoted the per capita, how many tests on average per 1,000 people in this country being done. Then he quoted some other, a few countries in Europe. Now, straight away, I was all over it. I said, he's quoting figures from countries with low rates of infection. Obviously, if you've got a low rate of infection, you've got low demand for tests, you won't test as many people. What you would ask when you got straight back up there is, Prime Minister, you seem to be quoting countries with very low rates of infection, much lower than ours. Obviously, they're not going to test as much if there's not as much demand. Why don't you tell me, and bear in mind I'd have already asked him what the demand was, why don't you tell me some figures per capita for countries with a similar rate of infection to us? Why are you not doing that? But all I thought to myself at the time, is that something that only a statistician would pick up on? How will Rayner do that? Because that's not her background. Then he emphasised the guidance on getting a test. Again, making it other people's fault. Again, it's the demand that's the problem, not the number of tests. We're providing loads of tests. Too many people going out. They need to read the guidance. Some people are going and getting tests when they don't need them. Again, it's not true. It doesn't matter whether you've read the guidance or not. You're not allowed a test. You've got to go through some questions. And if it doesn't look like you're meeting the guidelines for a test, you will not be given a test. So again, trying to put the emphasis on other people's fault. I'd have picked up on that as well. Now, unfortunately, question 5, Rayner, she said, yet again, the Prime Minister is saying it's somebody else's fault. It's the public's fault for using up all the tests. She said, these were the government's own figures and targets I've used, the government's own figures and targets, and they are failing on those targets and figures. They're their own targets and figures. And she said, and this got a good laugh, the next time a man drives from London to Durham, it'll probably be to get a COVID test, which is a good one. It's a good line, that. Having a pop at the testing chaos, people being asked to travel hundreds of miles for a test, at the same time as having a pop at Dominic Cummings. Never miss an opportunity to do that. Good one. The problem was she did not come back at him on his misuse of stats, and she did not come back on him on the idea. She's If you don't challenge Johnson, you sort of let him get away with things. And there'll be the odd thing that'll slip through, sure. But I think she should have challenged him on the fact he's trying to suggest that people are getting tests when they don't need them. And that's not true. And she should have said, you seem to be suggesting people are getting tests just because they feel like it. That's not the case. Not a single person has been issued with a test without going through a series of questions that the government's own appointed officials check in to make sure that they should be having a test. We're not just handing them over because people ask for them. But then she came on, she said, another serious issue, and she said, alongside the issue of people dying alone from COVID, now we've got mothers giving birth without their partners. The Health Secretary announced new guidance, but she says even that new guidance will not allow partners to join them, leaving mothers to have to endure difficult childbirth or even worse, traumatic miscarriages alone without support. And she said, will the Prime Minister meet with her and others to ensure no woman is forced to give birth without the support they need? Now, I thought at the time that would have been a good sixth question to ask, one where you can't come back whatever the Prime Minister says. So I would have put that sixth, but okay, it is what it is. Prime Minister basically stood up, gave a short, fairly non-committal answer. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Supportive, quick, didn't go off on one, sat back down again. Rayner then stood up for a sixth question and said, I'll take that to be a yes. And then she said for a sixth question, and I'd have swapped this round with the fifth because this is one where maybe you would have wanted to come back. And she said, look, infections are rising, testing is failing. When you're the Prime Minister, you can't keep trying to blame other people for your own incompetence. She says, we've got the highest death toll in Europe, and we're on course for one of the worst recessions in the developed world. She said, this winter we are staring down the barrel of a second wave with no plan for the looming crisis. She said, people can't say goodbye to their loved ones, grandparents can't see their grandchildren, and frontline staff are not getting the tests that they need. And what was the top priority for this COVID war cabinet, she said, this weekend? Restoring grouse shooting, alluding to the fact that in this rule of six, where more than 6 people can't gather except for certain exceptions, one of those exceptions, if you go grouse shooting, then you can. To which a number of people have been coming on with all sorts of things. If I want to have a birthday party outside, then can I do that? Can we somehow combine that with grouse shooting? And I suggested, well, it's quite easy. All you do, make some makeshift spears, go out in your birthday party, and then pretend you're hunting for grouse. Because the regulations don't say you have to be a good hunter. Obviously, don't use the spears, but just have them with you. If anyone asks you, we're grouse hunting. We just so happen to be celebrating someone's birthday while we do it. And if they try and tell you, but there aren't any grouse around here, you just go, I thought it was odd we weren't catching any. You're sorted. You're fine. No problem. But anyway, back to the PMQs. So then Rayner said, okay, grouse shooting. This'll be good news, I suppose, for the man who paid for Boris Johnson's Christmas getaway to a luxury Caribbean island and funded his leadership campaign and just so happens to own 2 Grousemore estates. Is this really your top priority? To which, and again, this is why I would have asked it 5th and the other one 6th, because this one allows Boris Johnson at this point, just like with Starmer, knows he can go off on one and there's no comeback. And this is where it came. He went, while Labour have been carping from the sidelines and raising, frankly, tangential issues, if not scare stories, to which I thought to myself, hang on a minute, you have said that no fewer than 4 of her questions were good questions, important questions. Now apparently they're tangential, scare stories. You've changed your tune, haven't you? And he said, we are getting on with delivering to the general public. And I thought, well, that's a change in tune. That is a change in tune. Anyway, he then went on his usual rant. This is the part of the procedure where he goes on does the same tactics against Starmer. But then he said, and this is, do you remember what I said before about, the stats thing? This is where he then said, and I noticed she didn't contest any of my statistics today. Now, actually, she did, but she didn't contest the ones on the per capita testing. And I thought to myself, bugger. Because I do wish she had. Because this is the problem, like I say, when you don't challenge him on something he says, he always gets the last word. The Prime Minister, you ask the question of the Prime Minister, they come back at you. That's how it works, and is how it has to work. You know that he, in answer to the 6th question, can just say whatever he likes and there'll be no comeback. You've got to challenge him on. Don't ever let him say, I notice you couldn't contradict me on that point. Because then the record is showing that you haven't contradicted it, and therefore it stands, it's true, I win. Now, of course, he didn't win the overall proceedings, but that just burned me up because it was an easy one to come back on. But like I said, that's no criticism of Rayner, because I would be straight onto it. I have a mathematical background. I understand statistics. I understand statistical tricks. I'm straight onto them when they occur. I don't know. I don't even know if Keir Starmer would have challenged that one. His background in law maybe would have put him in more exposure to stats, and maybe he'd have picked on it. He may not have done. Maybe this was just one of those that you wouldn't have anticipated him using, and unless you'd prepared for it, you wouldn't have the comeback. But anyway, overall, what I would say, very credible performance from Rayner. The questions were good. They did expose Johnson. She asked them in her own way, which was good. You know, she did ask them in her own way. She wasn't just parroting what maybe someone else had fed her. She didn't pull him up on a few things that were just asking to be pulled up on. Like I said, she's not super experienced at this, but this would have been good experience. And I would like to think we can see some more of this. One thing that has been disappointing is we've relied too much on Starmer holding the government to account. And this is simply because this is not the fault of the rest of his frontline politicians. This is because this government have been seeking to bypass Parliament at all times. There have been very few debates in Parliament. So it's been good that this week we've had a couple of front bench Labour MPs get to take on Johnson. That's been good. And she did well. But I wish she'd have just picked up on a couple of those things. But there it is. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.